Judges, would you please introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. My name is Becca Steinhoff. I am joining today from Casper, Wyoming. I am the executive director of the John P. L. Bogan Foundation, which is a private family foundation that funds grant making in this state, including support for civics education initiatives like this one. I am very much looking forward to hearing from you today.
And I'm Marcia Holland from a really great state, that of Montana. I'm here in Missoula. I was a career public defender in Fairbanks, Alaska, but when I moved back to Montana, I've been teaching at the law school in Missoula. And I'm really excited to hear your presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Barnhart. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm an attorney and I work at the Indiana Attorney General's office. I serve as the Chief Counsel and Director of the Consumer Protection Division. I'm a We the People alum, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, and students, please introduce yourselves as well as any teacher, coach, or mentor or other supporter who has been a part of this effort with you.
I'm Josephine Teagarden.
I'm Madeline Hoos.
I'm Colton Trossel. And I'm Logan Vincent. We're all seniors at Laurel High School, and our teacher is Mr. Deming.
Great, thank you. You may be seated. This is Unit 6, and today we will hear from you question number 2. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" You may begin when you're ready.
As George Washington once stated, the Army is an interesting instrument to play with. We think the Army is dangerous if put into the wrong hands or if it contains too much power. Since the beginning of our country, it has been evident the danger a large military holds. History over time has proven the potential for abuse of power by large militaries. Yet, our military has become more powerful under the government as the years have gone on. We agree with Eisenhower that a military-industrial complex in our lives prohibits liberty because in our own lives it can take away freedom. The presence of a standing military has its place in a country as large as ours, so we do not fall under pressure from other countries. However, this same military presence should not be within the country as a standing army against its own people. The government's purpose is to protect our rights. Under this role, they are not meant to be held against the will of the American people. That alone degrades our country's fundamental principles. We have strayed from America's true image, and we have also strayed from teaching these principles. We should remain understanding of the concept of what a representative government means. The purpose of our government's existence is not to watch over what they believe the people's best interests are, but is to protect the rights of the individual so they may decide on their own. Watching over the people's action by military force is not what our country's foundation entailed.
From the influence of the British, the Third Amendment represented what the Americans could attest, that standing armies were in fact a threat to liberty. They believed in the militias of the people if things got out of hand. For example, James Madison once said, "Always remember that an armed and trained militia is the firmest bulwark of republics, that without standing armies, their liberty can never be in danger, nor with large ones safe." Today's example of the complete opposite is the standing army seen at our capital, which would not be highly praised if the founding ideals of our country were more accurately addressed. Standing armies began as a concern that was highly debated within the founders' arguments. Altogether, they highly detested a large military presence. James Madison argued that a standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. Similarly, James Monroe believed that our union is not held together by standing armies, or by any ties other than the positive interests and powerful attractions of its parts toward each other. Thomas Jefferson was one of the most influential contributors to the protection of liberty. His ideals involved the concept of limited power because of the federal government's ability to encroach on individual rights. As he once said, "Most bad government has grown out of too much government," and much like he feared too much control because of its abilities, the concept equivalently trickled down to the military. Knowing the military's capability was just as detrimental.
Though as a society we are very different from when our country was first founded, we should be no less concerned for our liberties. When the people of a country have lost their motivation to uphold its strongest beliefs, there is no way of protecting it. As our Third Amendment directly prohibits supporting of troops, our Second protects against the threat of tyranny. The Second Amendment was put into place for the purpose of arming the population to resist encroachments by federal or state governments. As Thomas Jefferson said, "When the people fear government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. The founders feared an overreaching federal government and put the Second Amendment in place to stop this.
In regards to the world around us, we believe that there should be a slight military presence to the extent of watching over international matters. However, there should not be an excess of soldiers in every part of the world. Spending money on these soldiers, as well as other unnecessary affairs, is a waste of valuable resources. Even in the case of there being a direct threat, the United States should simply fix the problem at hand and not purposely interfere with other countries while there. A concept we should reflect upon is non-interventionism. We have grown too big to be ideally isolated from other countries. We can still use some of these same concepts of staying out of detrimentally ineffective affairs until it is necessary to deploy troops to fix these issues pertaining to the US. The US currently has troops deployed in Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Germany, and Japan, along with many other countries, totaling our troop count to over 1 million. While some of these countries are surrounding or remain a national threat, some of them are simply an old threat now lost in time. In light of this, Eisenhower's words ring true. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We are now ready for your questions.
Thanks. So let me ask you this. What a standing army looked like in the 1800s is different than what a standing army looked like during World War II. And given that the next likely war, so to speak, attack on America would be cyber in nature rather than physical threats, do you think that the Army should adapt so it's ready to confront this next generation of what a war might look like?
Relating to the second part of that question, I do think that we need to adapt over time to what the threats are. As you said, there are a lot of cyber threats today, and maybe we do need to be focusing on that specifically.
Thanks.
So I'd like to ask you in terms of if our government made the decision to contract physically in terms of remove troops and financially in terms of the amount of money that we spend on our military, what impact do you think that would have on the US's reputation globally and worldwide as it relates to the US being a superpower?
I think that how that perception would change would depend on where you cut the funding. If you cut the funding more directly with the soldiers and their direct equipment and the quality of that, I think that it would drop much faster in terms of having us be seen as a world power. But I would believe that if you cut more of the bureaucracy around the military and cut back the no-bid contracts and just sort of the excess spending around the military, then it wouldn't affect our position as a superpower as much.
I think to tack on with what my colleague said, it is interesting to look at the things that actually are being spent. In the past year, we spent over 700 billion in military spending, and we as civilians don't know where a lot of that is going to. And I think that can definitely be potentially a part of that.
I would agree. And I would also say a big part of it would just be directing more of where the funding is going versus the actual image of what it would look like we were doing. I would say it would just be more about knowing where that money is going and knowing what we're doing with it.
Relating to what my colleagues have said, for the average tax dollar that you spend in the US, about 24 cents of that goes to military spending. Only 4.9 cents of that actually goes to our troops, which is a bit of a complicated situation because around 12 cents goes to other, situations there. And that is a lot of money to be spent, especially because only 0.6 cents goes to children's health care, and a similar amount goes to K-12 education, which just is a big balance issue.
On a related note to some of the comments that you just made, why do you think the government invests so much in kind of their private military contracts or manufacturers? So that's the first part of the question. And then the second one is, do you think there's a way for the government to build that capacity internally so that they could shift that spending from contractors or manufacturers back to the government?
So I think that there definitely is a way for them to shift that money back to the government. We used to have national armories, such as Springfield Armory, they've all been closed, and we've shifted that over to private business. And to the first part of that question, I would argue that if you want to go more to the corrupt side of it, that some of these politicians give to these companies because then the companies endorse and give money back to their political campaigns.
And so let me ask you this. The power to really kind of control government spending at the military level is more housed with Congress. You know, the president can declare war, but Congress controls the purse strings. And yet a lot of congressmen are very dependent on donations from defense businesses. So can Congress actually ever provide appropriate, impartial oversight of the military spending?
I think it comes down to the integrity of the politicians. If you have a politician that runs a lot of integrity and says that I may take money from this defense corporation, but I'm not going to just willy-nilly give them money to spend in whatever wars that they want to spend and advocate for wars for them to create more of this product. I think that would be the ideal solution, but I'm not sure if we have the kind of people to run and have that much integrity.
Thank you.
I'm interested in hearing your take on whether we should use the military more domestically in terms of responding to, things like natural disasters or even civil unrest or things of that nature.
I think that vastly depends on what the issue is. If there is natural disasters and things like that, maybe it would be good to bring the military into things like that. But honestly, I feel like as a person having, what we could consider standing army situations around the average citizen could be concerning. Having them in, disputes and things like that would definitely create a bit of unrest.
I think to tack on to what my colleague said, you could also think of more of the militia being something to be able to step into situations like those as well. And the militia is the people, and I think those people stepping up would also help in those scenarios.
And to build off what my colleague said, here in Montana specifically, as part of the Montana Constitution, we have the governor has the right to call a rising of the militia of Montana citizens to respond to civil unrest or other situations that would require militia force.
Federalist 29 also spoke by Alexander Hamilton that a militia can actually back up if standing armies aren't protecting rights of the people, and the people actually have that choice.
You talked a little bit about the framers' perspective on the military and that it should remain with civilians, and then noted some challenges, I guess, to getting correct information for civilians to really understand military spending in particular. Do you have any solutions as to what we might do to ensure that control remains with civilians, or that we have access to the information that is necessary for us to have that control?
I think overall the people have the control in that situation, and it depends on what we do with it that things will actually get done.
Yeah, to take just to build off what my partner said, it's really the people have the power, but it's whether we choose to exercise it or not. Because the people have the power to hold their representatives and therefore Congress as a whole accountable. It's just whether the people choose to do so or not.
And so let me ask you this, just in terms of shifting budgets a bit. Do you think
Time.
never mind. Good job, guys.
Well, thanks. We'll go ahead and offer a few comments for you. I really appreciated that you came right out and took a stance on this issue, and then proceeded to weave evidence and other compelling support for your stance throughout your prepared remarks. And then I think you kept that same coherence as you went into the question and answer portion of the hearing. So well done on staying really true to where you started. I would have done a little better at the onset if you had maybe helped me understand exactly how you were defining that military industrial complex, or how you would set up the influence that might be a part of that, and that was initial kind of in the historical context and then in the contemporary context. But your points were really clear. I really appreciate that you acknowledge some of the dynamics within this in terms of direct spending that goes to troops and indirect to contractors where we may have less a sense of what's happening, acknowledging corruption and choice and some of these pieces that just create complexity, I think, in this issue. And so I really appreciate that you included that in your remarks today, because I think those can be, this is why we love Unit 6. It's so difficult and there isn't a right or a wrong necessarily, but I just appreciate that you made it clear where you stood and acknowledged some of the difficulties that are a part of this work. So this was a really, you added a lot of insight and you tied that insight to evidence. And so you were clearly well prepared for this. So thanks for that preparation and overall well done.
Thank you.
And I just want to add, I really appreciated the deep dive you did in looking in terms of how the founding fathers, using that term fairly generically, you cited to several of them, actually many of them, but you did a really good deep dive into what the concerns were at the beginning of the formation of our nation. And then that gave you a jumping off point to walk us through, leading to concepts, especially civilians don't even know where military spending is going. And you provided a good framework for where the military spending is going. And I also appreciate that, I guess, the frank answer that a lot of congressional oversight is dependent on the integrity of congressmen and women. And so thank you for understanding it's a really complex issue. And I also appreciated your answer to domestic involvement, because your various answers indicated that's a complex question. And your thoughtfulness about how complex it is gives me hope for the future, in the sense that you will be the leaders in our cities and states and perhaps in our countries in the future. So great work, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with all those comments. I think the opening of using the idea of the military being a toy, having a 7-year-old boy that plays in the backyard with his army toys all the time is a really, really good way to get your point across. I thought that was fantastic. I also thought that you had a really good use of statistics, particularly in follow-up. It's easy to read the opening and read stats in an opening, but to be able to use them meaningfully in follow-up, I think is a very, very good tactic. I also appreciate the use of citing to the state constitution. I think, the idea or concept of federalism and understanding our federal constitution in addition to the state constitution is really important exercise for this program. So well done, good job. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you.